They tell you an Omega's story ends at rejection, that the hierarchy is not cruel. It simply is. Like weather, like seasons, like the way the moon pulls the tide without asking permission. I believed that once. I was raised inside that belief the way you are raised inside a house. You do not question the walls. You just learn which rooms you are allowed to enter. I was allowed very few rooms, but I was grateful. That was the worst part. I was grateful for the scraps of acknowledgement, for the quiet moments when he looked at me like I was real, for the private tenderness he never once offered me in public. I called that love. I built an entire future inside that small dim word and told myself it was enough. Then came the morning with the positive test. Then came the office, the witnesses, the formal words spoken in that flat administrative tone that left no room for argument. Then came handle it. 2 words. That is all I was worth after 2 years of silent devotion and 1 night that created life. But those 2 words were not an ending. They were a key turned in a lock that his family spent 3 generations pretending did not exist. This is the story of what Ashvale created when it threw me away. This is the story of the heir they feared before it was even born. This is the story of the woman they called nothing who turned out to be everything. Welcome to Ashvale. Try to keep up. 4 days earlier. The morning light had not yet reached the lower corridors of the pack house. Leora moved through the dim hallway with the particular silence she had perfected over 2 years of navigating spaces where she was tolerated but never truly welcomed. Her footsteps barely touched the stone. Her breathing stayed shallow and even. Her scent pulled close against her skin, the way she had been taught since girlhood. Suppression. They called it courtesy. A kindness to those who found an Omega's presence overwhelming. She had hated that lesson her entire life. She used it now without thinking, the way you use a language you resent but cannot afford to forget. The kitchen corridor opened ahead of her, and she heard the sound before she saw its source. Not a cry, something quieter than a cry. The small, wet sound of someone trying very hard not to make any noise at all while their body insisted on making it anyway. Leora slowed. A girl knelt on the stone floor near the service entrance. 15, maybe younger. Her hands were red from scrubbing. A bucket of gray water sat beside her, and the floor around her knees gleamed with the evidence of work that had already been done thoroughly and was now being done again. 2 beta wolves stood over her, neither of them large, neither of them threatening in any way that would register as formal misconduct. They simply stood with the casual authority of people who understood that their position in the hierarchy made the girl's discomfort irrelevant. "Do it again," one of them said. "The grout is still dark." The girl pressed her brush to the stone without lifting her head. Her shoulders shook once, then stilled. She had practice at this. She knew how to make herself smaller. Leora recognized the technique because she had invented her own version of it years ago. Something shifted in Leora's chest. Not anger exactly. Something older than anger. The bone-deep recognition of watching someone learn a lesson that should never have been taught. She stepped forward. "That section is mine," she said. Her voice carried no confrontation, no challenge, just the calm, practiced tone of someone clarifying a scheduling matter. "I was supposed to finish it before the morning rotation. I must have missed a spot." The 2 betas looked at her. The taller one's lip curled slightly, the expression wolves reserved for Omegas who inserted themselves into conversations uninvited. "We did not ask you." "No," Leora agreed. But the section is mine. I will take care of it. She held the look, not defiantly, not submissively, with the particular steadiness of someone who has learned that the safest form of resistance is the kind that looks like cooperation. The betas exchanged a glance, then they left, because the interaction had become more effort than the satisfaction it provided, and that calculation was the only math their kind understood. Leora knelt beside the girl. The floor was already clean. It had been clean the first time. They both knew that. The girl's eyes were wet. Her hands trembled against the brush. She was trying to compose herself with the urgent desperation of someone who has been taught that visible emotion is visible weakness. Leora reached over and gently took the brush from her hands. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. "Nella." The girl's voice was barely above a whisper. "Nella." Leora set the brush aside. She pulled a dry cloth from her apron pocket and pressed it into the girl's reddened hands. "Listen to me. Do not let them see you cry. Not because crying is weak, because your tears are yours. They are not a performance for anyone who does not deserve them." The girl looked at her with the wide, uncertain eyes of someone hearing a thing they needed to hear, but did not yet know how to hold. Leora squeezed her hands once. Then she stood, picked up the bucket, and carried it to the drain as though the entire interaction had been nothing more than a task completed. But as she walked away, her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not in response to the betas, not in response to the girl's distress, something else. Something that had been stirring for 11 days now with a rhythm she could not explain. Not the ordinary restlessness of pack tension or seasonal shifts. Something quieter, something internal and deliberate, like a second heartbeat learning its rhythm beside her own. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was the cold snap that had moved through Ashvale territory that week, or the way she had been sleeping poorly since the last full moon. She was good at telling herself things. 2 years of private longing had made her exceptionally skilled at it. She turned toward the east corridor and the healing quarters beyond it, and she pressed her hand briefly against her stomach without understanding why. Elder Celine was already waiting. That should have been the first sign. The old healer had not resumed her usual tasks. She had not reorganized the herb shelves or restocked the compressed linens. She was simply sitting in the chair beside the window, hands folded, watching the door with the patience of someone who already knew what was coming. "You are early," Celine said. Leora sat on the narrow cot. She did not know why her hands were steady. She had expected them to shake. Celine pressed 2 fingers gently to the inside of Leora's wrist and closed her eyes. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but inside those seconds, Leora felt something rearrange itself in the architecture of her understanding. Something she had been refusing to name for 11 days. "You carry life," Celine said softly. "Strong life." The words landed with the particular weight of things that are both wonderful and terrible at the same time. Leora's hand found her stomach slowly. Her wolf stirred, not in distress, in recognition. The way you recognize a voice before you place the face. She held that for one private moment. The weight of it, the impossible tenderness of it. "Does anyone else know?" Leora asked. "No one has been told. Keep it that way. For now." Celine nodded, but her eyes held something Leora was not yet ready to read. Something old and patient and heavy with waiting. Leora folded the small confirmation slip and pressed it into the deep pocket of her uniform. She stood. She walked back through the east corridor, one hand resting against her stomach beneath the fabric. The morning shift had not yet begun. The halls were dim and mostly empty. She was already composing it in her mind. How she would tell him. Privately, of course. She had long since stopped imagining anything between them that involved witnesses. She would find a moment when his schedule allowed. She would be calm. She would give him the information without pressure, without expectation painted across her face. She was practiced at removing expectation from her face. She turned the corner toward the upper residential wing, and she heard his voice before she saw him. Low, unhurried, carrying the particular ease of someone who has never once worried about being overheard. The Omega needs to be relocated before the council visit. She is becoming a distraction. Leora stopped walking. Her wolf went absolutely still, not tense, not frightened. Still, the way a forest goes still before something shifts inside it. The way the air changes before weather arrives. Bastion's voice responded. How soon? Week's end. Theron continued with the casual efficiency of a man moving through items on an agenda. Borderfield will take her. I will have Corwin arrange the transfer paperwork. She will go quietly. A pause. Brief. Dismissive. She is an Omega. She will go however I tell her to go. Leora stood in the dim corridor with her hand pressed against her stomach and listened to the conversation move on to border patrol rotations. Casual, uninterrupted. The voice of a man who had filed away a decision and advanced to the next item on his list. Her wolf did not whimper. It did not recoil into grief the way it had 100 times before when small cruelties found her in quiet moments. It did something she had never felt from it before. It went completely still, like something had made a decision she had not caught up to yet. She turned around. She walked back the way she had come, steadily, without rushing, and somewhere inside her, the second heartbeat continued its quiet, deliberate rhythm, entirely unbothered by the fact that the world around it had just changed. Theron signed the transfer document at 9:47 in the morning. He sat alone in his private study, not the formal office, but the smaller room where the fire was kept and the shelves held books he actually read. The room where he had sometimes called her in the evenings, where the space between them had occasionally felt almost honest. His pen hovered over the signature line for 4 seconds. He counted them. 4 seconds of hesitation before 28 years of conditioning closed the gap and moved his hand. He looked at the chair across from the fire, the one she sat in when she came. She always sat with her feet tucked beneath her and her hands wrapped around whatever cup he gave her, and she watched the flames with an expression that made the room feel like it belonged to both of them. He signed. The document went into the folder. The folder went into the stack. He straightened his jacket and checked the time. The council representatives from Cold March were expected by mid-morning. There were protocols to observe, perceptions to manage, a particular image of competence and decisive authority that he had spent 4 years constructing and now maintained the way you maintain a building. Constantly, structurally, without examining whether the foundation was sound. He did not allow himself to think about the way her scent lingered in this room. Honey and night rain. The combination that his wolf recognized before his conscious mind could intervene. The scent that meant safety in a language older than words. He closed the folder and left the study. The summons arrived at Leora's door at 9:53. Not a request. Not a note slipped beneath the wood with any warmth folded into its wording. A formal pack summons printed on Ashvale letterhead with the alpha seal pressed into the lower corner. The kind used for territory violations and disciplinary hearings. She read it twice. Then she folded it the same way she had folded the confirmation slip that morning. Carefully, precisely. She placed it beside the other one in her pocket. 2 pieces of paper, 2 truths. One she carried with tenderness. One she carried with the quiet steel of a woman who has just understood exactly where she stands. The formal office was larger and colder than his private study, built for the function of authority rather than the experience of it. Bastian stood near the window. 2 men she recognized as regional council representatives occupied chairs along the left wall. She did not know their names, but she knew their insignia. Cold March affiliated. Her stomach tightened. Theron stood at the center. Full alpha presentation, formal jacket, structured posture, the careful blankness he wore in professional settings like armor. He did not look at her when she entered. He waited until she had closed the door behind her before he acknowledged her presence at all. Leora, her name in that tone. Flat, procedural. Alpha, she replied. You understand why you have been called. She held her hands loosely at her sides. Tell me anyway. Something crossed his expression, too fast to name. He straightened slightly. Your position within Ashvale territory has been reviewed. Effective end of this week, your pack assignment will transfer to Borderfield. All obligations to this territory are concluded. He reached for the document on the desk. The bond is formally severed. You will sign here. She did not move toward the desk. The council representatives watched carefully. Bastian watched the floor. You are rejecting me, she said quietly, without inflection, just the fact of it, placed plainly in the formal air of the room. I am releasing you from... You are rejecting me. She said it again, still quiet, still even, call it what it is. His jaw shifted. This is the cleanest outcome for both of us. I am pregnant. The room did not make a sound. She had not planned the timing of it. There had been no strategy behind the moment she chose. The words had simply arrived, not from desperation, not as a weapon, but because the information existed and silence had never once protected her inside these walls. She watched his face. She had spent 2 years learning that face. The small muscle near his left jaw that tightened under pressure. The way his eyes changed when he was calculating rather than feeling. The precise quality of stillness that meant something had landed and he was deciding rapidly what to do with it. She watched him decide, and something inside her that had been quietly hoping, for 17 minutes since she turned away from that corridor, since her wolf went still, broke very cleanly, like a clean fracture, not shattered, just broken, precise, irreversible. He did not reach for her. He did not step forward. He looked at Bastian. Handle it. 2 words. He straightened his jacket. He picked up the folder on his desk as though the next item required his attention. He walked toward the side door of the formal office without looking at her again. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. The council representatives exchanged a look. Then they rose quietly and excused themselves through the main entrance. Bastian remained. He stood near the window with the uncomfortable expression of a man navigating something he had not been briefed for. You have 48 hours, he said carefully, to decide what you want to do about this before it becomes a formal council matter. She looked at him steadily. You mean before they decide for me? He did not deny it. Why are Cold March representatives in this room, Bastian? His expression shifted. Why are they here? He pressed his mouth closed. She understood. The Cold March representatives had not arrived because of her transfer paperwork. They had been here before the summons was sent. They had been here waiting. This was not a response to her pregnancy. They did not know about the pregnancy yet. They had come for something else, and she had just handed them something far more valuable than they had arrived expecting. She picked up the unsigned rejection document from the desk. She folded it without reading it further. She placed it in her pocket with the other 2 folded pieces of paper. 3 now, 3 truths, each one heavier than the last. "I will let you know what I decide," she said calmly. She walked out of the formal office. She walked down the corridor. She walked through the pack house entrance and into the gray morning air outside. She did not run. Not yet. But her wolf was no longer still. It was pacing, low and focused and deliberate, like something that had decided on a direction and was simply waiting for her feet to catch up. The rain touched her face. She stood in it, and she made herself a promise. Not a dramatic one. Not a declaration shouted at the sky. Just a quiet, bone-deep decision. The way the most permanent decisions always are. She would not beg. She would not shrink. And she would not let them reduce her child to a problem to be managed. She was an Omega. She was 6 weeks pregnant. She was rejected. And she was just beginning. Celine was waiting. That was the first thing Leora noticed when she pushed open the door to the healing quarters for the second time that morning. The elder had not moved from her chair. She had not reorganized the herb shelves or restocked the compressed linens or done any of the dozen quiet, methodical things she occupied herself with during the early hours. She was simply sitting beside the window, hands folded, watching the door like she had known exactly when it would open again. "How bad?" Celine asked. He said, "Handle it. In front of witnesses." Celine closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. Not surprise. The strange, uncomfortable relief of someone who has been waiting a long time for a difficult thing to finally begin. "Sit down," Celine said quietly. "I do not have much time. If they are watching me, sit down, child." Something in the elder's tone stopped her. Not authority, not command. The particular heaviness of someone carrying information they have held too long and can no longer justify keeping. Leora sat. Celine was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved to Leora's hands, then to her face, reading something written in a language most people had forgotten. "Your mother," she began, "never told you the full truth of her bloodline." Leora went still. "My mother was a healer, a common Omega. She told me. She told you what kept you safe." Celine's voice was gentle but precise. There is a difference between truth and the version of truth that keeps a child alive. The morning light through the narrow window was thin and gray. Outside, the pack house was beginning its daily noise. Footsteps, distant voices. The ordinary machinery of pack life continuing unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding in a small room with herb-stained walls, and a woman who had been keeping secrets for longer than Leora had been alive. "Your mother's bloodline," Celine continued carefully, "carried a classification that has not existed openly in 3 generations. We call them Veilborn, not a rank, not a title. A genetic distinction. Wolves whose power does not manifest at first shift the way ordinary bloodlines do. It lies dormant, patient. It waits." Leora listened without moving. Her hand had found her stomach again. The gesture was becoming instinctive now. The way you reach for something precious, when you sense the ground shifting beneath you. Waits for what? Celine held her gaze with the steady, ancient patience of a woman who understood that the next word she spoke would change everything. Reproduction under rejection. The words landed with extraordinary quietness, as though the room itself understood their weight and chose to receive them gently. The veil-born activation requires a specific condition, Celine continued. The carrier must be pregnant, and the bond must be formally severed while the child exists, not abandoned. Formally, deliberately severed. The rejection must be witnessed and real. She paused. Let the silence hold the shape of what she had just said. What happened this morning in that office triggered it. Leora absorbed that. The clinical precision of it. The awful, perfect irony. That the thing designed to diminish her had instead lit a fuse that had been waiting her entire life. My mother knew this could happen. She chose a life that made it unlikely. Celine's voice softened. She loved your father genuinely. She stayed small, stayed quiet, stayed within the lines. She was protecting you from the attention that activation brings. What kind of attention? Celine's expression answered before her words did. The weight of decades of watching and waiting settled visibly across her features. The child will grow faster than a normal pregnancy. Your body will begin to change within days. Your wolf will not be what it was. She leaned forward slightly. Leora, you cannot remain inside Ashvale when that begins. The moment anyone here sees what you are becoming, the child becomes a political object and you become a threat to be managed. They already want to manage me. Not like this. Celine shook her head slowly. Not for this reason. When they realize what you carry, it will not be transfer paperwork and border assignments. It will be containment, control, or worse. A knock at the door. Both of them went silent. Bastian's voice came through the wood, measured, careful. Leora, the Alpha requests your immediate return to the formal office. Leora did not answer. Her eyes stayed on Celine. The elder reached beneath the small table beside her chair and produced a folded piece of cloth. Inside it lay a worn map with creases that spoke of years of careful consultation, a small glass vial of something dark that caught the thin light faintly, and a name written on paper in handwriting that was not Celine's. Kyle, Leora read quietly. She will find you, Celine said. You only need to reach the Eastern Wood before the Border Patrol rotation. 30 minutes. You have 30 minutes, Leora. Bastian's voice again, slightly less measured. I need you to open the door. Leora looked at the folded cloth in her hands, then at Celine. The question formed itself not as accusation, but as certainty. You have known this was coming. I have been ready for 3 days. Why did you not warn me before he? Because it had to be real. Celine's voice carried something very old and very tired. The rejection had to be real. If you had known, you might have prevented it. And if you had prevented it, the activation would not have happened. You would have remained what they needed you to remain. She paused. Her eyes glistened but did not spill. Small, safe, invisible. And that child inside you would have inherited the same silence your mother chose. The knock came again, sharper now. Leora stood. She tucked the folded cloth into her jacket. She looked at Celine one final time, at the elder's steady, certain eyes, at 20 years of carried silence sitting quietly in her expression. Thank you. Celine nodded once. Go. Do not look back at the pack house. Your wolf already knows the direction. Leora crossed to the small rear window of the healing quarters, the one that opened onto the narrow service path behind the east wing. Away from the main corridor. Away from Bastian's voice. away from the formal office and the unsigned documents and the two words that had set everything into motion. She pushed it open. The morning air came in cold and clean and waiting. Her wolf rose beneath her skin, not the small, gray, deferential wolf she had carried her whole life. Something else, something that moved with a certainty she did not yet understand, but already instinctively trusted. She climbed through the window. She did not look back. The service path was narrow and damp from the morning rain. Leora moved along it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent 2 years learning every route through the pack house that did not require her to explain herself to anyone. The path opened onto a maintenance corridor between the outer buildings. The corridor emptied onto an unpaved track used by the groundskeeping rotation. She had never walked these routes with the intention of leaving. She had walked them with the intention of surviving. The difference between those two things, she was beginning to understand, was the difference between everything she had been and everything she was about to become. She counted her steps. She controlled her breathing. She kept her scent pulled close against her skin. Suppression, the Omega skill taught to young girls as courtesy. The skill she had resented every day of her life. It was saving her life now. The irony was not lost on her. She simply did not have time to appreciate it. The tree line appeared ahead. 50 meters, 40, 30. Her wolf surged forward beneath her skin, not in fear, in recognition. Something in the trees was already moving toward her. Something that smelled like open country and long roads and an absence of pack allegiance. She crossed into the tree line. A figure stepped out from between two birches directly in her path. Leora stopped. The woman was tall, not imposing in the way pack warriors were imposing, but precise, like something that had been refined down to exactly what it needed to be, and nothing excess remained. Dark travel gear worn at the knees and elbows in the way that suggested real distance rather than aesthetic. Her hair was pulled back with the kind of efficiency that indicated hair was simply not a priority. Her eyes were the particular gray of very early morning, the hour before color returns to anything. She did not reach for a weapon. She did not shift her stance into anything threatening. She simply looked at Leora with the calm, thorough attention of someone completing a long calculation. "Celine sent word," the woman said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "I have been waiting 3 days. You are Kale." "Yes." Leora studied her for one moment. The instinctive, rapid assessment of someone who has learned that trust extended carelessly is trust that gets used against you. Kale did not fill the silence with reassurance. She did not soften her expression or offer anything designed to make Leora feel comfortable. She simply waited, which was somehow more trustworthy than any of those things would have been. "How did Celine reach you?" Leora asked. "We have an arrangement that predates your birth." Kale's voice carried no sentiment, just fact. "She has been watching your bloodline for a long time." Before Leora could respond, the sound reached them from the direction of the pack house. Not words. A howl. Short, commanding, directional. The patrol signal for a located absence. Someone had opened the healing quarter door and found the window. Kyle's eyes moved briefly toward the sound, then back to Leora. No alarm in the movement. Pure assessment. They will rotate east first. "Bastion knows your habits. Then we go north." "We go north," Kale agreed, already moving. They pushed deeper into the eastern wood, angling north along a shallow stream bed that broke scent trails effectively. Another piece of Omega knowledge, another skill born from years of making herself small enough to disappear, except now She was not disappearing. She was relocating. And the distinction mattered more than she could have explained. Kale moved beside her with an efficiency that asked no questions and wasted nothing. No unnecessary words, no performative urgency, just forward motion, deliberate and calm. Behind them, a second howl lifted above the tree line, then a third from a different direction, triangulating. 8 minutes, Kale said without breaking stride. Before the first patrol reaches the stream bed. They moved faster, not running. Running attracted attention. Running was panic made visible. They walked with the focused purpose of women who understood that the most dangerous thing they could do right now was look like they were doing anything at all. The stream bed curved north. The howls reached the bank behind them and stopped, confused, reorganizing. By the time the patrol found the trail again, Leora was already gone. Moving through open country in the gray morning light, her wolf steady and certain beneath her skin, carrying something forward that had no interest whatsoever in being found. The neutral territory opened around them like an exhale. Leora had never stood on land that belonged to no pack. She had spent her entire adult life inside boundaries, inside walls, inside the particular geography of belonging to someone else's territory and navigating someone else's rules. The absence of those things did not feel like freedom. Not exactly. It felt like vastness, like stepping out of a room you had not realized was shrinking around you. The air was different here, not better or worse, just unowned. And for a woman who had spent 2 years being owned in every way that mattered except the one that would have required someone to say it aloud, unowned air felt like the first honest thing she had breathed in a very long time. They walked for hours. Kale did not fill the silence. She let it exist between them with the naturalness of someone who understood that silence was not emptiness. It was space. And space was something Leora had not been given in a very long time. In the quiet stretches between birch groves and open meadow, Leora began to learn Kale the way you learn weather, through observation rather than conversation. The way Kale read wind direction from the movement of high branches. The way she checked their trail every few minutes with a glance that was so practiced it appeared casual. The way she adjusted their course by fractions, always accounting for something Leora could not yet see. "You do this often," Leora said eventually. "Guide people out." Kyle glanced at her. "When it is necessary." "How often is it necessary?" "More often than it should be." Kale's eyes returned to the tree line ahead. The world has always been unkind to women carrying things other people want to control. They made camp as the afternoon light softened. Kale constructed a shelter from deadfall and compressed brush with the practiced efficiency of someone who had slept in 100 such shelters and stopped caring about comfort somewhere around the 20th. It was functional. It was concealed. It was enough. Leora sat against the interior wall and pressed her hand to her stomach. The second heartbeat was stronger now, steadier, as though the act of leaving had given it permission to announce itself more fully. "You should eat," Kale said from the shelter entrance. "I am not hungry." "The child is." Leora looked at her. Then she accepted the dried provisions Kale offered and ate slowly, tasting nothing, but acknowledging the truth of what Kale had said. Her body was no longer entirely her own. The decisions she made now carried weight beyond herself. As the evening settled around them, Kale spoke again. "Your body has already started to change." Leora's hand stilled against her stomach. "How can you tell?" "The way your wolf is carrying itself." Kale studied her with that thorough, unhurried attention she brought to everything. It is not the same wolf that entered the tree line this morning. Something shifted the moment the rejection completed. She paused. You felt it too. Leora did not answer immediately, but she thought of the corridor, the moment she heard his voice dismissing her existence with the casual efficiency of a man organizing furniture, the moment her wolf had gone still, not wounded, not broken. Decided. Yes, she said quietly. I felt it. The child grows faster than standard, Kel continued. Celine estimated your body will change visibly within 3 to 4 days. Your wolf will not be recognizable as what it was. And the scent. Kel looked at her with something that might have been respect. You noticed. It is different. Leora lifted her wrist to her nose. Deeper. More complex. Like something underneath has been unlocked. The Veil-born signature. Kel nodded. It will intensify. Within 2 days, any trained wolf who passes within a mile will know something unusual is here. She paused, which is why we keep moving at first light. They sat in the shelter as darkness settled over the neutral territory. The sounds of the wild came in layers. Wind through high branches. The distant call of something that was not wolf. The particular silence of land that answers to no authority. Leora lay on her back and placed both hands on her stomach. The warmth was there again, stronger than it had been in the healing quarters, more deliberate, like a sound that has been distant and is now standing beside you. Tell me about the Veil-born, she said into the darkness. Kel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the particular care of someone handling old information with the respect it deserved. The Veil-born are not a rank, not a title. They are a genetic echo of something that existed before the hierarchy was formalized, before alphas and omegas and betas were sorted into the system we live inside now. She shifted against the shelter wall. The old texts describe them as the original frequency, the signal that all wolves responded to before political structure taught them to respond to something else instead. And the activation requires exactly what happened to you: pregnancy, formal rejection, witnessed severance. The conditions are specific because the power is specific. It does not activate under general hardship. It activates under the precise circumstance of being publicly declared worthless while carrying life. Leora absorbed that. The elegant cruelty of the design. A power that could only wake when someone had been told in front of witnesses that they and their child did not matter. My mother avoided this. Your mother chose love over power. Kel's voice held no judgment. She chose a quiet life with a man who valued her. She stayed within the lines. She never gave the activation conditions a chance to be met. She paused. She was protecting you. And now, the protection is gone. Now the protection is unnecessary. Kel said it with a simplicity that carried enormous weight. Because the thing she was protecting you from has already happened, and what comes next does not need protection. It needs space. The second night passed without incident. Leora slept briefly and woke before dawn with the warmth radiating from her center like a low-frequency sound that her body was producing without her conscious direction. Her wolf was restless in a way it had never been restless before, not anxiously, not in response to threat. With the particular energy of something that has been kept in a small space for a very long time and can feel for the first time that the walls are no longer there. The third night, she stopped sleeping entirely. She lay on her back in the dark of the shelter with one hand flat against her stomach and felt it. The steady, insistent warmth of the child, fuller now, more deliberate. A presence that had moved from background to foreground with the quiet authority of something that simply decided it was time. Her wolf pushed forward. Not the tentative, deferential surface approach she had felt her entire life. Not the careful, apologetic way her wolf had always moved. The manner of something told repeatedly that it was too much, too present, too large for the space allowed. This was different. This was the movement of something that had simply decided the space belonged to it now. The shift came without her permission. She had been taught that a wolf that shifts without permission is a wolf that has lost control. That was the teaching, the warning. The particular fear that dominated Omega conditioning from first shift onward. Loss of control was the thing that confirmed every prejudice about their instability. But this was not loss of control. It was something more precise than control. It was authority. The kind that does not require permission because it does not recognize the framework in which permission is granted or withheld. The transformation moved through her differently than it ever had. No resistance. No negotiation between human and wolf. No effortful crossing of the threshold between forms. Just arrival. Complete and immediate. Kel turned from the shelter entrance. Her expression did not change, but she became very still. The wolf that stood in the shelter was not gray. Not the slight sand-colored wolf that Leora had carried since her first shift at 16. The one that had confirmed to everyone who saw it exactly where she ranked. Small, underpowered, appropriate. The wolf that stood in the shelter was large. Not the exaggerated enormity of an alpha display, but something proportioned differently. Built for endurance rather than dominance. Silver-edged black fur that caught the thin moonlight filtering through the shelter gaps and held it. Eyes the deep, particular amber of late afternoon light. The amber that is almost gold, but carries more complexity than gold alone. Color that had not existed in the small gray wolf. Color she had never looked out of before. She expected chaos. She expected the disorientation that came from a forced shift. Instead, she felt settled. More settled than she had felt in human form in 2 years. Perhaps longer. She moved experimentally. Her paws found the earth, and she felt the warmth immediately. Deeper. More specific. A frequency rather than a temperature. Her child pulsed with it. Steady. Entirely untroubled. "There it is," Cale said quietly. Something in her voice was very old. Not surprised. Confirmed. When Leora finally shifted back, the return was smooth. No collapse, no weakness. She simply stood in human form again, breathing normally, feeling the wolf settle beneath her skin, with the quiet confidence of something that knows it can come back whenever it is needed. Cale crossed to her. She studied Leora's face with that careful, unhurried attention. "I need you to hear this clearly. What you just shifted into does not exist in any contemporary bloodline. The last documented shift of that type was 4 generations ago. It ended a regional conflict that had run for 11 years. She paused. Not through violence, through the frequency, the signal that the form produces. Other wolves do not experience it as power. They experience it as recognition. Something older than their hierarchy telling them to be still. Leora absorbed that, and the child amplifies it. The child is the source, Cale corrected gently. You are the conductor. Silence held between them. The night air moved through the shelter, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth, and something ancient underneath both. Leora's hand rested on her stomach. The warmth there was steady, certain, like the heartbeat of something that had always known what it was and had simply been waiting for the world to stop telling it otherwise. Then Kale's expression shifted, the first time in 3 days that the controlled surface of her face had admitted anything unscheduled. "Tell me," Leora said. "Theron's bloodline." Kale spoke carefully, measuring each word. "I have known since Celine first contacted me that his family archive was sealed 3 generations ago. What I confirmed 2 days ago from the records I carry." She paused. Let the weight build. The suppressed bloodline his grandfather buried was not common alpha stock. It was Vale, collapsed branch, dormant for 3 generations, but present. Leora went very still. "Which means the child carries both lines," Kale said. "United. For the first time in 4 generations, both branches of the same ancient bloodline exist in one heir." The weight of it settled across Leora's shoulders, not crushing, clarifying, like a lens sliding into focus after years of looking at the world through glass that was never quite right. "He did not know," Leora said. "No," Kale agreed. "He rejected you without understanding that in doing so, he completed the exact sequence required to wake everything his family spent 3 generations trying to bury." Leora looked at her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors and folded confirmation slips and pressed flat against her stomach in the dark of a healing room that morning, while a man she loved decided she was not worth the cost of keeping. The same hands that were now warm with something that had no interest in being small. She allowed herself one moment with it, the full scope of the irony. The man who had spoken 2 words over her existence had not ended her story. He had started it. Then she looked up, because the night air had changed, and her wolf, newly vast and newly certain, had detected something that the old gray wolf would never have noticed. A sound from the north. Not Ashvale wolves. The scent was wrong. The discipline of the howl pattern different, more structured, more intentional. Kale's eyes moved to the tree line. Her body shifted into the particular focused stillness that Leora had learned in 3 days meant the situation had just changed. "Cold March," Kale said, no alarm in her voice. Not yet, but the careful neutrality of someone recalibrating a timeline. "I expected them in 5 days, and they are here now." Kale looked at her. "Yes, someone told them where we are." Kale did not deny it. "Someone told them where you are, and what you are carrying, and they have decided 5 days was too long to wait." The northern tree line held its darkness. Somewhere inside it, wolves moved with a coordination that spoke of training and purpose, and an objective that had been clearly defined before they ever left their territory. "How long do we have?" Leora asked. Kale looked at her steadily, at the wolf still visible beneath the surface of her skin, at the quality of her eyes that had changed in 3 days from the soft, uncertain gray of an omega to something deeper and more complex, at the faint warmth the air held around her that had not been present when they first met at the birch trees. "Long enough," Kale said, "for you to decide how you want to be standing when they arrive." Leora straightened. Her wolf rose beneath her skin, not in threat display, not in panic, with the particular unhurried certainty of something that has just fully remembered what it is. She looked north toward the sound of Cold March wolves moving through the dark. And for the first time since the positive test, since the formal office, since the 2 words that had tried to reduce her life to an administrative correction, she was not afraid. Alpha Voss did not arrive with wolves at his back. That was the first thing Leora registered. The deliberate absence of a show of force from a man who clearly possessed one. He walked into the neutral territory, clearing alone at dawn, with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never needed to announce his danger, because the danger is simply apparent to anyone paying attention. He was not what she had constructed in her mind during the night. She had built something aggressive from the howls and the coordinated movement patterns, something blunt and acquisitive. What stepped into the clearing was neither of those things. He was perhaps 40, lean in the way that suggested speed over mass, close-cropped dark hair, and eyes the particular shade of deep green that held calculation the way still water holds depth. You could see into it, but not to the bottom. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, looked at Kel first. A brief, acknowledging look, the way two professionals recognize each other across a room. Then he shifted his attention to Leora. He took his time, not rudely, thoroughly, the way a person looks at something they have studied extensively in theory and are now calibrating against reality. "You are smaller than I expected," he said. "That is what they all think," Leora replied. Something moved briefly across his expression. Not quite amusement, the precursor to it. He took 2 steps into the clearing and stopped again, keeping deliberate distance. A man who intended threat did not manage proximity this carefully. "I will be direct," he said. "Please." A unified Vale air has not existed in 4 generations. He folded his hands. The last time both bloodline branches converged in a single carrier, the resulting individual dissolved a territorial conflict that 11 years of Alpha Council meetings had failed to resolve. Not through military dominance, through something that operates beneath dominance, something older, more fundamental, something every wolf feels in their bones before their mind has time to construct a position on it. He paused. "You felt the clearing respond to you last night." It was not a question. Leora did not confirm it. Cold March has been the custodial record keeper for Valeborn bloodlines for 2 centuries, Voss continued. Not a glamorous responsibility. Largely administrative, tracking dormant carriers, monitoring activation conditions, maintaining the archive. He looked at her steadily. But the custodial function also includes a protective one. When a Vale line activates, Cold March is obligated to ensure its stability. "Stability," Leora repeated. "Yes, whose definition of stable?" He held her gaze. "That is exactly the right question. Then answer it." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. More careful. "The air you carry will produce a frequency at birth that every wolf within territorial range will feel. Not metaphorically, physically. The way you feel a subsonic sound, not in your ears, in your sternum." He paused. Uncontained, that frequency destabilizes pack hierarchy across a wide radius. Alphas who have held their positions through conventional dominance will feel that dominance questioned at the biological level. Some of them will respond rationally. Many of them will not. Leora absorbed that. Her hand moved to her stomach. Her wolf noted the motion and settled. "And Cold March's solution," she said slowly, "is to contain the air before birth." "To provide structured support," Voss corrected carefully. "You want naming rights and co-guardianship." She watched his expression. "Celine warned me what that language means in custodial practice. It means Cold March holds authority over how my child is raised, what it is taught, who it is permitted to bond with, what its power is permitted to do, and when." She held his gaze. "You are asking me to trade one pack house for another." Voss did not deny it immediately. That honesty was the most unsettling thing about him. "I am asking you to be strategic," he said. "I am being strategic. That is why the answer is no." He studied her for a long moment. The clearing was very quiet. Birds had not returned since he entered it. "You understand," he said carefully, "that without Cold March's involvement, other alphas will move. Less measured ones, less willing to have this conversation before taking action." "I understand," she said, "and you are not afraid." "I did not say that. No," he said quietly, "but you are sitting in neutral territory, 3 days from your pack boundary, carrying the most politically significant heir in 4 generations, and your hands are perfectly still." He looked at her hands. "That is either extraordinary courage or extraordinary foolishness." "It is neither," Leora said. "It is certainty." Voss regarded her with an expression she had not seen on him yet, something that was still recalibrating, still adjusting the distance between what he had expected and what was sitting in front of him. Then he inclined his head slightly. Not submission, acknowledgement. "I will not obstruct you," he said, "but I will be watching. And I will not be the only one." He turned and walked back toward the northern tree line with the same unhurried confidence he had arrived with. Leora watched him go. Her wolf tracked his scent until it faded into the trees and the clearing settled back into the particular stillness of a space that had just held something large and was now absorbing its absence. Kale spoke from behind her. "He will be back, I know. And he will not come alone next time. I know that too." Miles south, inside the pack house he had built his entire identity around, Theron was standing in the training ground, pressing 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist. The bond channel was still open. That was impossible. He had spoken the formal severance in front of witnesses. Bastion had been present. Council representatives had been present. The words had been said correctly. He had rehearsed them, which now struck him as a detail so cold he could not look directly at it. But the channel was open, not fading, not fraying toward silence the way a severed bond was supposed to behave in the hours following rejection. It was strengthening, growing louder, developing texture and depth and a directional quality that pulled his attention northeast with a persistence his training could not override. Physician Edric appeared at the edge of the training ground. He was not a man who rushed. He was not a man who sought out the alpha at non-standard hours without reason. The particular quality of his expression as he crossed the ground made Theron's jaw tighten before a word was spoken. "You feel it," Edric said. "Not a greeting. Not a question. The bond is not severing. No, it is not. Explain that." Edric produced a book from inside his jacket. Not a modern text. Something older, cloth-bound and worn at the spine with the careful deterioration of something consulted many times over many years. The page he had marked was underlined in fresh pencil. Theron read it, then read it again. Veil carriers present a unique bond reversal response upon formal rejection during active pregnancy. Rather than severance, the rejection event catalyzes bloodline activation, which in turn strengthens rather than dissolves the mate bond. This phenomenon has been observed exclusively when both parties carry ancestral veil genetic markers, whether dormant or active. He looked up slowly. "You are saying I carry it. Your grandmother's lineage was reclassified 3 generations ago," Edric said quietly. "Suppressed from formal record at your grandfather's request. He considered it a liability to alpha standing. It was never eliminated. It was hidden." Theron closed the book. The weight of it in his hands felt different now. Not just paper and binding, but the specific heaviness of information that rearranges the architecture of everything you thought you understood about yourself. He had rejected her. He had stood in a formal office in front of witnesses and spoken words he had rehearsed. And in doing so, he had not weakened her. He had not diminished her. He had activated something ancient in the woman carrying his child. And then Edric said the thing that changed everything else. When I returned from your grandmother's archive this morning, the council representatives had already left, but one of them accessed the pack medical registry before they departed. He paused. And the access was authorized by Counselor Rendwick. The cold that moved through Theron had nothing to do with the morning air. They knew, he said. They came knowing, Edric replied. The pregnancy, the bloodline, the timing. Someone informed Coldmarch before she ever walked into that office. Theron's voice dropped to a register the training ground had never heard from him. Quiet. Absolute. Who? Edric looked at him with the steady, unhappy eyes of a man who had spent 16 years watching this pack from the inside. You already know who. Corwin confirmed it within the hour. The communications were not difficult to find once someone knew where to look. Counselor Rendwick had been corresponding with Coldmarch affiliates for months, not through official channels, through a private network that predated Theron's tenure as Alpha. The correspondence outlined a sequence that was precise and deliberate. Monitor the Omega. Wait for pregnancy confirmation. Ensure formal rejection occurs under witnessed conditions. Position Coldmarch representatives to receive the activation intelligence before anyone inside Ashvale understood what had happened. Theron read the correspondence in his private study, the room where the fire was kept, the room where she used to sit in the chair across from him with her feet tucked beneath her. Rendwick had not simply betrayed the pack. He had engineered the betrayal of Leora with the patient methodology of a man who understood exactly what he was building and exactly what it would cost, and had decided the cost was acceptable because it was someone else who would pay it. Every lesson Rendwick had taught Theron about leadership, every principle about distance and perception and the management of political image, every carefully constructed framework that Theron had used to justify keeping Leora private, keeping her small, keeping her in the specific rooms the hierarchy allowed. All of it had been architecture, Rendwick's architecture, designed not to make Theron a better alpha, but to make him a controllable one. A man who would make exactly the decision he had made in the formal office because he had been trained from the age of 19 to believe that decision was strength rather than cowardice. Theron closed the file. He sat in the quiet study for a long time. The fire had gone out. The chair across from him was empty. Then he stood. He walked to the door. He opened it. Corwin was waiting. Rendwick, Theron said. Where is he? Left the territory 2 hours ago. Corwin's expression was carefully neutral. Took 4 personal guard wolves, non-pack affiliated, headed northeast, toward the neutral territory, toward her. Theron did not issue orders. He did not summon Bastion or activate the patrol network or do any of the procedural things his training demanded. He walked out of the pack house alone. He crossed the grounds. He passed the tree line. And he ran. Not with the coordinated authority of an alpha mobilizing resources. Not with the strategic calculation of a man managing a crisis. He ran with the singular, desperate focus of a man who has just understood that the woman carrying his child is being hunted by the person who taught him how to throw her away, and that the only thing standing between her and that person is neutral ground that belongs to no one, and a clock that has just started counting backward. Voss stopped playing neutral at midday. Leora had known it was coming. She had watched him recalibrate twice in the clearing that morning. Once when she held her ground against his offer. Once when the dawn light shifted and the warmth around her body became visible in the cool air, a faint shimmer that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with what was growing inside her. Each recalibration had produced a slightly more compressed version of his composed exterior, the way repeated pressure produces denser material over time. When his wolves moved from the tree line into the clearing perimeter, 12 of them, disciplined and quiet, positioning with the precision of long practice, she did not register surprise. She registered the particular focused clarity of a situation that had resolved from complex to simple. Voss stood at the clearing center. He looked at the space where Leora stood. Then he shifted his attention to the northern tree line where a new sound had entered the morning. Footsteps, single, unhurried but carrying weight. Theron walked into the clearing alone. He stopped when he saw Voss. Then he looked at Leora. The bond channel pulsed between them. Strong. Involuntary. A frequency that had nothing to do with either of their decisions and did not care about the politics surrounding it. His scent reached her before his voice did. Cedar and storm, the combination her wolf recognized before her conscious mind could intervene. She did not move toward him. She did not step back. Voss spoke first. His voice carried the measured precision of a man who has just been handed a complication and is deciding how to fold it into his existing strategy. "You have violated neutral ground," he said to Theron. "Cold March protocol requires response." Theron did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Leora. Then Voss continued. "You are one alpha on neutral ground without your pack. I have 12 trained wolves and legal standing." He spread his hands with the careful reasonableness of a man who genuinely believes he is the most rational person in every room he enters. "I am not looking for violence. I am looking for compliance with a process that exists to prevent it." "And the process," Theron said quietly, still looking at Leora, "ends with you holding custodial authority over her child. The process ends with stability. Your stability." Voss's jaw tightened fractionally. Theron shifted. Not gradually. Not with the warning movements of a wolf announcing intent. He shifted the way Leora had shifted 3 nights ago in the shelter. Completely. Immediately. With the authority of something that has stopped negotiating with the boundary between forms. His wolf was large, gold-edged brown, built for power rather than speed, with eyes that had shifted from their usual controlled assessment to something that operated below thought entirely. He landed between Leora and the nearest Cold March wolf before the circle could tighten. 3 wolves engaged him simultaneously. He was outnumbered and he was not unaware of it. And he fought anyway, not recklessly, with the focused brutality of someone who has identified the one thing that matters and is removing every obstacle between himself and it. He broke the circle's eastern point. One wolf thrown into the undergrowth with a collision that shook bark from surrounding trees. The second he met head-on, taking the hit across his shoulder and using the momentum to drive the wolf sideways into the third. Blood appeared on his shoulder. He did not slow. Leora watched him fight for her. She watched the man who had spoken 2 words over her existence in a formal office throw his body between her and 12 trained wolves without hesitation, without strategy, without the careful calculation she had spent 2 years watching him apply to every decision he made. And she felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something more fundamental than forgiveness. Recognition. The same recognition her wolf had felt in the healing quarters when Celine confirmed the pregnancy. The recognition of something that was always there, waiting to be seen. But she did not need him to save her. She felt the pulse building. Rising from the child with the steady, inevitable pressure of a tide responding to a moon it cannot see, but has never once failed to answer. The warmth moved outward from her center through her ribs and into her arms and down through her legs into the earth beneath her feet. She did not try to contain it this time. She let her wolf rise, fully, completely, with the same total arrival she had felt 3 nights ago in the dark of the shelter. The shift moved through her with the smooth authority of something that had already decided. Silver-edged black fur in the gray midday light. Amber gold eyes cutting through the chaos of the clearing. She stepped forward. The effect was not immediate. Then it was. The Cold March wolves, in the middle of engagement, stopped. Not because they chose to, because the frequency hit them at the level beneath choice. The deep, ancient register of something their blood recognized before their minds could contest it. 2 of them dropped to one knee in wolf form, an involuntary motion. They shook with the effort of resisting it and could not. 3 more slowed, their circling movements becoming uncertain, the coordinated precision of their training dissolving at the edges like ink in water. Theron broke through the remaining wolves, engaging him. He shifted back to human form in a single motion, blood on his shoulder, breathing controlled. He moved to her side, not in front of her, beside her. The distinction was precise, and she registered it. 1 Cold March wolf remained standing, the largest, closest to Voss, his most senior fighter. He held against the frequency with visible effort, muscles rigid, head lowered, his entire body trembling with the strain of maintaining a position his blood was telling him to abandon. Then he looked at Voss, and slowly, with the expression of a man reporting a structural failure in a building he designed himself, he lowered his head. Voss was silent for a long time. The clearing settled. Birds did not return. The trees held the particular stillness of a space in which something significant has just occurred and the air has not yet decided what to do with it. "Well," Voss said finally. His voice was different. The professional precision remained, but something underneath had shifted. The foundation of an assumption that had held for a very long time, developing its first visible crack. I owe Celine an acknowledgement. She told me 3 years ago that when this bloodline activated, no custodial framework would be adequate. He paused. I told her she was being sentimental. Leora shifted back. She stood in the clearing without swaying, without weakness. The child warm and steady inside her. "Call them off," she said. Voss looked at his wolves, the ones still kneeling. The ones who had managed to hold, but were no longer moving. He looked at the one who had lowered his head. "Stand down," he said quietly. The clearing exhaled. Voss straightened his jacket with the habitual precision she was beginning to recognize as his version of gathering himself after something had briefly rearranged his composure. "The alphas who move after you," he said to Leora, "will not have had this clarification. They will come with the assumptions I arrived with, and they will not all be willing to stand down." "I know," Leora said, "and they will receive the same answer you did." Voss studied her for a long, quiet moment. Then he inclined his head, not deeply, not the performed deference of submission, a genuine, measured acknowledgement. One authority recognizing another without requiring the transaction to diminish either of them. "I will not obstruct you," he said, "but I will be watching." "I know. So will everyone else." He turned. His wolves fell in behind him with the quiet efficiency of long discipline. They moved toward the northern tree line, and the clearing absorbed their absence gradually, the way a room absorbs the departure of a presence that has been large inside it. Leora stood in the clearing. The midday light had shifted. The air smelled like pine and disturbed earth and the faint copper of blood that was not hers. Theron stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Your shoulder," she said. "It is fine. It is bleeding." "It is fine," he repeated. Then, quietly, "You did not need me." She looked at him. "No. I came anyway, I know." The wind moved through the clearing. The child shifted inside her. A small, deliberate motion. Warmth radiating outward. Then Theron spoke again. His voice carried something she had not heard from him in 2 years of private conversations. Not the careful modulation of a man managing perception. Not the rehearsed steadiness of alpha presentation. Something unfinished. Something that did not know its own shape yet. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Before anything else happens in this clearing, before we talk about what comes next, or what I did, or what I failed to do." She waited. Rendwick engineered this. Leora went still. Theron's jaw worked. The muscle near his left ear that she knew so well tightened and released and tightened again. The Council communications. The Cold March representatives arriving before your summons was sent. The timing of everything. He exhaled slowly. Rendwick has been corresponding with Cold March affiliates for months. He knew about the Valeborn bloodline. He knew about the activation conditions. He positioned everything so that when I rejected you, which he had spent years training me to do, Cold March would be ready to claim custodial authority before anyone inside Ashvale understood what had happened. Leora absorbed that. The scope of it. The patient, deliberate architecture of a man who had spent years building a machine designed to produce exactly the outcome that had occurred in that formal office. "He trained you," she said, "since I was 19. Theron's voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him something visible. Every principle I operated on. Distance as discipline, efficiency as virtue, the management of perception as leadership. He paused. He built me into a man who would make exactly the decision I made, and I did not see it because the framework he gave me was the same framework I used to evaluate everything, including him, including me." Theron looked at her. The expression on his face held everything he had not said in the formal office. Everything the 2 words had crushed into silence. Everything the rehearsed severance had tried to make clean and administrative and forgettable. "Yes," he said, "including you." The clearing held them in the particular tension of 2 people standing inside the wreckage of something that was partly engineered and partly chosen, and trying to determine where the engineering ended and the choosing began. "Where is Rendwick now?" Leora asked. "He left Ashvale 2 hours before I did." Theron's jaw tightened. 4 personal guard wolves, non-pack affiliated, headed northeast. Here. As if the word had summoned its own answer, Kyle's voice came from the tree line. Low and immediate. Movement. Southern approach. 4 wolves. Not Cold March formation. Leora turned. Her wolf rose beneath her skin. Not the surge of combat readiness. The focused, settled awareness of something that has already decided how this ends, and is simply waiting for the world to arrive at the same conclusion. They came through the trees at the clearing's southern edge. 4 wolves in human form, armed not with the formal weapons of pack military, but with the particular equipment of men who operate outside official channels. Men who answer to a paycheck rather than a bond. Mercenary posture. Professional distance. The specific body language of people who have been paid to accomplish an objective and do not care about the politics surrounding it. And behind them, stepping into the clearing with the measured stride of a man who has spent his entire career entering rooms he has already decided the outcome of, Counselor Rendwick. He was older than Leora had imagined. She had heard his name in packhouse corridors for 2 years, but had never seen him this close, 60 perhaps, tall but narrowing at the shoulders the way age narrows certain men, removing the physical authority and leaving only the political kind. His eyes were pale and calculating, and held the particular quality of someone who has looked at people as instruments for so long that the habit has become invisible to him. He looked at the clearing, at Voss's departed wolves, at the disturbed earth, and the blood on the ground, and Theron standing beside Leora with the particular quality of a man who has just dismantled a significant portion of his own identity and has not yet finished rebuilding. Renwick's expression did not change. That was the most unsettling thing about him, the absence of surprise, as though every variable in this clearing, including the ones that should have been impossible to predict, had been accounted for somewhere in his calculations. "Theron," he said. His voice carried the warm, familiar authority of a mentor addressing a student. The tone of a man who has spent years being trusted and sees no reason why that trust should not continue to operate even now. "Step away from the Omega." Theron did not move. The muscle in his jaw worked once. "She is carrying an unregistered veil air," Renwick continued. His tone was patient, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should already understand it. "The custodial protocols exist for exactly this situation. Cold March has been notified. The documentation is prepared. This can be resolved quietly, professionally, in a manner that protects everyone involved." He looked at Leora for the first time. The particular way he looked at her, thorough, clinical, categorizing, made her wolf press forward beneath her skin with an intensity that was not defensive. It was something deeper than defense. It was the specific and absolute refusal to be categorized. "The child must be registered under Cold March custodial authority," Renwick said, "for its own safety, for the stability of every pack within range." He spread his hands, the same gesture Voss had used. Reasonable men and their reasonable hands. "This is not cruelty. This is governance." Theron spoke. His voice came from the register Leora had never heard from him before the formal office, the one that had emerged in the training ground when Edric told him about the medical registry access. Quiet. Absolute. "Everything you taught me," he said, "was designed to produce this moment. Every principle, every framework, every lesson about distance and perception and the clean, decisive management of complications." Renwick's expression held, steady, composed, the mask of a man who has worn composure so long it has become structural. "You built me into a man who would reject the woman carrying my child in front of witnesses," Theron continued, "because you needed the rejection to be real. You needed the activation to occur under conditions you had prepared for. You needed Cold March positioned to receive custodial authority before anyone understood what had happened." He paused. "And you needed me to believe it was my decision." Renwick regarded him for a moment. Then something shifted in his pale eyes. Not guilt, not regret. The particular recalculation of a man who has been exposed and is now determining which of his remaining options still function. "I gave you everything you have," Renwick said. His voice lost its warmth. The reasonable mentor falling away to reveal the architecture beneath. Your position, your competence, the respect of the council. Without my guidance, you would have been an unremarkable alpha with a buried bloodline and no understanding of how to wield the political tools required to hold a territory. He looked at Theron with the hard, steady eyes of a man stating facts he considers unchallengeable. "You owe your entire tenure to my instruction." "No," Theron said, I owe my worst decision to your instruction, and I am done being instructed." Rendwick's hand moved. A small signal. His 4 wolves shifted stance simultaneously, not attacking, readying. The professional preparation of men who are waiting for a command and will execute it without hesitation when it comes. Leora stepped forward. She did not shift. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform any of the displays that the hierarchy taught wolves to associate with authority. The posturing, the projection, the deliberate expansion of presence designed to make others feel smaller. She simply walked toward Rendwick with her hands at her sides, and her wolf settled and certain beneath her skin, and the child warm and steady inside her. And she let the frequency come, not as a weapon, not as a display of power, as truth. The deep, fundamental frequency that existed before hierarchies were formalized, before alphas and omegas and betas were sorted into the system that men like Rendwick had spent their careers manipulating. The original signal, the one that every wolf carried in their oldest blood and could not argue with regardless of how sophisticated their arguments had become. It moved outward from her center, through the clearing, through the disturbed earth and the cold air and the space between bodies. Rendwick's wolves felt it first. The largest one, a man with scarred hands and the blank professional expression of someone who has been paid to not have feelings about his work, dropped to one knee. Not slowly. His body responded to the frequency the way a tuning fork responds to its pitch. Immediately. Without consultation. His face registered confusion, then something older than confusion, then nothing at all except the still quiet expression of a man who has just encountered something his training did not prepare him for, and his blood is telling him to simply stop. The second wolf followed, then the third. The fourth held for 3 additional seconds, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted at his sides, every muscle in his body straining against the signal. Then his knees found the earth, and the strain left his face, and was replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Rendwick stood alone. He was not a wolf who shifted. He had built his entire career on the human side of the divide, on politics and leverage and the careful architecture of other people's decisions. His wolf was old and atrophied and had not been consulted on any matter of significance in decades. But it was still there, and it felt the frequency. She watched it happen, the particular sequence of a man who has controlled everything around him for 40 years, encountering something that does not recognize control as a relevant concept. His composure held for 5 seconds. Then his hands began to shake. Then his shoulders. Then the careful architectural structure of his expression developed fractures at every joint simultaneously. And what came through was not anger and not fear, but the vast, disorienting emptiness of a man who has just discovered that the framework he built his entire life inside is not the largest thing in the room. His knees did not bend. They simply stopped holding him. He went to the ground with the graceless, involuntary collapse of someone whose body has made a decision his mind refuses to authorize. Leora stood over him. She looked down at the man who had engineered her rejection, who had spent years building the machinery that would produce the formal office and the 2 words and the soft final sound of a door closing behind a man who did not look back, who had positioned himself to claim authority over her child before the child had ever taken a breath outside her body. She looked at him kneeling on the earth of neutral territory with his wolves beside him and his composure in ruins and the particular devastating clarity of a man who has just understood that the thing he spent his career trying to control has no interest whatsoever in being controlled. She did not feel rage. She had expected rage and found instead something calmer and more absolute. The settled certainty of a verdict that does not require emotion to be valid. "You spent your life manipulating hierarchy," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried, every word placed with the precision of someone who understands that what she is saying will not need to be said twice. "You moved people like furniture inside a house you designed. You built frameworks and called them governance. You engineered outcomes and called them stability. You taught a man to reject the woman carrying his child and called it leadership." She paused. "Now you will live without any of it." She looked at Theron. He understood. The particular communication of two people who have spent 2 years learning each other's faces in firelight and silence. He understood what she was asking without her needing to name it. Theron stepped forward. His voice carried the formal weight of an alpha exercising territorial authority. But beneath the formality, something else was present. The particular gravity of a man who is dismantling the structure that made him and is building something else in its place with every word he speaks. Counselor Rendwick, by authority of Ashvale territory and witnessed by cold march through Alpha Voss's prior presence in this clearing, I strip you of all rank and council standing. Your pack bond is severed effective immediately. You are exiled from Ashvale territory and every affiliated boundary. You are rogue. The word landed in the clearing like a stone dropped into deep water. Rogue, the worst thing a wolf could be. Not dead, not imprisoned. Disconnected. Cut from the bond network that gave every wolf their sense of belonging and identity and place. Removed from the system entirely. For a man who had spent his entire life manipulating that system, who had built his identity on his position within it, who had never existed outside the architecture of pack politics for a single day of his adult life, rogue was not a punishment. It was annihilation. Rendwick looked up from the ground. His pale eyes held something she had not seen in them before. Not the calculation. Not the patient, strategic assessment. Emptiness. The specific emptiness of a man looking at the rest of his life and finding nothing in it that he recognizes. His wolves, still kneeling, did not look at him. Mercenaries without a contract. Men who had been paid by a man who no longer had the authority to pay anyone anything. They rose slowly. They walked away. They did not look back. Rendwick remained on the ground for a long moment. Then he stood. The movement was slow and mechanical. The movement of a body that has forgotten why it should bother with the effort of standing. He looked at Leora one final time. She met his gaze. She did not soften. She did not harden. She simply stood in the certainty of what she was and let him see it clearly. The Omega he had designed a machine to control, standing in the open air of neutral territory with a child inside her that had just unmade 40 years of careful architecture in the space of a single minute. He turned. He walked toward the southern tree line, alone. No wolves at his back, no council title, no pack bond humming beneath his skin, no system to manipulate, no framework to hide inside. Just a man walking into the trees with nothing. The clearing settled. Kale emerged from the tree line. She looked at the disturbed earth, at the blood on Theron's shoulder. At Leora standing in the center of the clearing with her hands at her sides and the child warm inside her and the faint shimmer of frequency still visible in the air around her body, she said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Leora turned to Theron. The bond channel pulsed between them, stronger than it had ever been, a current that neither of them had chosen, and neither of them could dismiss, and neither of them was pretending to ignore anymore. "We need to talk," she said. "Yes, not here. Not standing in the place where all of this just happened." She turned toward the shelter. He followed, not leading, not managing, following, and understanding the difference for what was perhaps the first time in his adult life. The shelter was small and dim and smelled like pine resin and the particular warmth that Leora's body had been producing for 3 days. They sat across from each other in the space where the light filtered through the deadfall gaps and made patterns on the earth floor that shifted when the wind moved. Leora looked at him. She did not speak immediately. She let the silence sit between them the way Cale had taught her silence could sit. Not as emptiness, as weight, as the space in which honest things have room to arrive. Theron did not rush to fill it. That was new. The man she had known for 2 years would have managed this silence, would have shaped it into something productive, would have found the efficient path through the discomfort and taken it before the discomfort had time to teach him anything. He simply sat and waited, and let her decide when the waiting was over. "Tell me about Renwick," she said. He told her. All of it. The correspondence Corwin had found. The months of communication with Cold March affiliates. The careful positioning of council representatives before the summons was ever sent. The deliberate engineering of a rejection that would produce exactly the activation conditions Renwick had spent years preparing for. And beneath the facts, the harder thing. The thing that was not about Renwick at all. "Every principle I operated on," Theron said quietly. "Distance as discipline, efficiency as virtue, the management of perception as leadership." He paused. "He built me into a man who would make exactly the decision I made in that office. And I did not question it because the framework he gave me was the same framework I used to evaluate everything, including me," Leora said. Theron looked at her. The expression on his face held everything he had not said in the formal office, everything the 2 words had crushed into silence. "Yes," he said, "including you. And that is the part I cannot assign to his engineering. He chose the tools, but I chose to use them on you. Every morning for 2 years. That was mine." The honesty of it landed in the small space between them with a weight that was different from anything she had felt from him before. Not rehearsed, not managed, not the careful precision of a man who has determined the optimal words for the situation and is delivering them with appropriate gravity. Just a man sitting in the dim light of a shelter built from deadfall and telling the truth because he had run out of reasons not to. Leora absorbed it. She did not soften. She did not harden. She held the information the way she had learned to hold difficult things in the past 4 days, with clarity rather than reaction, with the settled understanding that she would decide what to do with it in her own time. "I want to tell you something," she said, "not because you have earned it, because it is true, and I am done carrying truths in silence." He waited. "I knew," she said. "Every morning for 2 years. I knew you were choosing your image over me. I knew that not yet was not a timeline. It was a wall you built one day at a time, and I helped you build it by accepting each day as though the next one would be different." She paused. "I am not angry at you for what Renwick engineered. I am angry at myself for how long I agreed to be small. And I am done being angry about that because the anger served its purpose, and I have better uses for what I carry now." Theron was quiet for a long time. The patterns of light shifted on the earth floor between them. Then he spoke, and his voice carried something she had not heard from him in 2 years of private conversations. Not the careful modulation of a man managing perception. Something unfinished, something that did not know its own shape yet. "I want to be precise about this," he said. "In 2 years, every time the council brought a crisis to my desk, I found myself thinking about how you would see it. Not because you were weak, because you saw things I missed." He paused. The fracture in his voice widened slightly. "The Omega girl in the kitchen corridor, the one you helped that morning before everything happened. You think I did not know. I knew. I watched you kneel beside her and hand her a cloth and say something quiet that made her stop shaking. And I stood in the corridor above and did not come down. Because coming down would have meant being seen choosing you. And I was too much of a coward to let anyone see that the person who made my leadership feel hollow was the Omega I kept in the dark." Leora's chest tightened. Her wolf stirred. Not in the vast, settled way of the new form. In the old way. The small, quiet way that remembered what it felt like to love someone who would not let you exist in daylight. She breathed through it. She let the feeling arrive, and she let it pass through her without it changing the architecture of what she had decided. The child pulsed between them, a warm, sudden frequency that moved outward from Leora's center with the absolute certainty of something announcing itself. Theron's knees found the ground, not slowly, not with the theatrical grace of a chosen bow. His body responded to the frequency the way a tuning fork responds to its pitch, immediately, involuntarily, without consultation. He looked up at her from the ground, not humiliation, not shock, recognition. The expression of a man who is seeing something clearly for the first time and understanding that the clarity was always available to him and he chose not to look. Leora looked down at him, at the alpha who had spoken the words designed to diminish her, and had instead handed her everything. At the man whose blood carried the same ancient signature as her own and had not known it until the woman he rejected woke it for both of them. "Get up," she said quietly. He rose. They sat in the shelter for a while longer, not speaking, not needing to. The silence between them was different now. Not the comfortable silence of two people who understand each other. Not yet. Something more tentative than that. The silence of two people who have broken something important and are sitting with the pieces and have not yet decided what to build from them. But they were sitting with them, together. And that was more than either of them had managed in 2 years of pretending. Cale's voice came from outside the shelter, measured, practical. "We should rest. The northern pass will be clear at dawn. If we move before the second hour, we reach the Ridge Valley before dark." Leora looked at Theron one final time, then she moved to the shelter entrance. The evening was settling over the clearing. The air smelled like pine and cold earth, and the faint residual copper of a day that had held more confrontation than most people experience in a lifetime. She lay down in the shelter. She placed her hand on her stomach. The child was warm and steady. 2 heartbeats, 2 lives, 1 body carrying both forward. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, to rest in the particular way she had learned since her wolf stopped being small. The way that was less about unconsciousness and more about allowing every part of herself to simply be present without requiring any of it to perform. Tomorrow they would walk. Tomorrow she would begin telling him exactly what came next. Tonight she rested, and the child rested with her. And somewhere outside the shelter, in the darkening neutral territory that belonged to no one, a man who had spent his entire adult life leading sat quietly against a tree and practiced the unfamiliar discipline of not being in charge of anything at all. Dawn came slowly to neutral territory, not the sharp, declarative sunrise of Ashvale's eastern-facing land where the light arrived with the efficiency of a pack on schedule. This was a gradual thing, gray softening to pearl, pearl warming toward gold, the sky negotiating its own transition without urgency, taking its time the way all honest things take their time. Leora had been awake long enough to watch all of it. She stood at the edge of the clearing where the land opened toward the wide valley below, the unmapped corridor that belonged to no pack, and therefore, for one suspended moment in the ongoing life of this territory, belonged to her. The air was cool and clean, and carried the scent of pine resin and distant snow, and the faint mineral smell of the stream bed they had followed north 3 days ago when the world behind her was still the only world she knew. Her hand rested on her stomach, not anxiously, not protectively against threat, simply resting there, present with what was present. The child moved, a small deliberate motion, warmth radiating outward in that steady, certain pulse that had become as familiar to her now as her own heartbeat. 2 rhythms, 2 lives, one body carrying both forward into something that had no map and no precedent and no administrative language adequate to contain it. Kale stood a respectful distance behind her. She had barely spoken since the confrontation. She did not fill silence unnecessarily. It was one of the things Leora had come to value most about her in 4 days. The understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can offer another person is the space to hear their own thoughts clearly. Theron's shoulder had been dressed with what the travel kit provided, functional if not comfortable. He had not complained. He had sat still while Leora worked and watched her face with an attention that asked nothing and offered everything. And she had not known what to do with that yet. So she had simply finished binding the wound and moved to the shelter entrance to think. She had been thinking since. Now he approached from the shelter, unhurried, reading the quality of her silence correctly enough not to disturb it prematurely. He stopped beside her, looked out over the valley. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I am not going to ask you to come back." She looked at him. Ashvale is mine to repair. The leak in the council. The cold March connection. The framework I built on performance rather than substance. He looked at the valley with the expression of a man seeing something clearly for the first time and understanding that clarity is not comfortable. It is simply necessary. That is mine, not yours to return to and absorb. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved between them, carrying the mixed scent of cedar and rain and honey and night air, his and hers, tangled together in ways that neither chemistry nor politics could fully explain. "But I want to say something," he continued, "and I am not saying it to earn anything. I am saying it because it is true, and you deserve to hear true things spoken aloud instead of folded into silence." She waited. "I was never indifferent to you." He said it with the careful precision of someone placing something fragile on a surface and stepping back. "I want to be very specific about that because I think the alternative explanation is worse, and I am done choosing easier versions of the truth." He exhaled slowly. "I was afraid of what choosing you publicly would cost me, of what it would mean to be seen placing an omega above council preference. I had spent so long building a particular structure of myself that the thought of dismantling any part of it felt like falling. And I chose the structure over you, every single time." He looked at her. "That is not indifference. That is a choice, a cowardly one, and I will not dress it as anything else." Leora looked at him for a long time, at the man who had hurt her with such clean practiced efficiency that he had not even understood the depth of it until the architecture of everything he had built on that efficiency began to collapse beneath him. At the man whose blood ran alongside hers and the child between them, ancient, dormant, finally awake. "You had 2 years," she said quietly. 2 years of private moments where you could have chosen differently. Council meetings end. Visitors leave. There were 1,000 mornings where it was just us and you chose your reputation every single time. "Yes." She held his gaze. "I am not asking you to love me, Theron." Her voice was steady and certain and came from somewhere deeper than the past 4 days, deeper than the past 2 years, from the place where the veil-born warmth lived, where the child pulsed, where the wolf that was no longer small and no longer gray rested with the quiet confidence of something that knew exactly what it was. "I am not standing here waiting for a declaration. I am telling you that this child is mine. Her future is mine to shape. I am not leverage. I am not a complication. And I am not yours to manage. Not anymore." The words settled into the clearing the way stones settle into still water. Deliberate, irretrievable, permanent. He did not look away. "I know," he said. "Then why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to the register she associated with the private hours, the ones that had made 2 years of public invisibility survivable and ultimately unforgivable in equal measure. "Because the bond will not sever." And I spent the first hour after I left that office telling myself that was a biological inconvenience, a complication to be managed. His voice stayed low. "And then I read what Edric brought me, and I understood what I had done, what my family had buried, what I had been conditioned to overlook." He stopped, and the only coherent thought I had after that was that I needed to find you before someone else made decisions about your future the way I did. She studied him, not with the soft, uncertain eyes of the Omega who had sat in his chair by the fire, and told herself that not yet meant eventually. With the steady, clear gaze of a woman who had walked through a window and across open country and into a form that the world had not seen in 4 generations. "If you stay," she said, "and I am not asking you to, you stay as my equal, not my alpha, not my authority, not the person who decides what information I receive and when." She kept her voice even. "My partner, someone who trusts me with the full truth of every situation, who makes no decision that concerns me without me, who treats my judgment as equivalent to their own." "Yes," he said. "And the moment that becomes impossible for you." She held his gaze. "You leave." Without argument, without framing it as protection or strategy or timing. "Agreed." Just like that. "I have been wrong about a great many things." His voice was quiet. "I am certain about this one." She looked at him for another moment. Something moved in her chest, not the bond, something quieter. The first movement of something she was not ready to name yet, but was willing to acknowledge existed. The way you acknowledge a sound you have not yet identified but know is real. She turned back toward the valley. I am not going back to Ashvale, she said. Not yet. Not as a returning Luna retrieving her position. If I return, it will be as something the pack has not experienced before, and they need to be ready for that, which means you need to rebuild internally before I walk back in. She glanced at him. Can you do that? Rendwick and whoever he reported to inside the council. Already in motion, Theron said. Corwin began the review the morning you left. She nodded slowly. Her hand rested on her stomach. The child shifted warmly. Not a warning. Not a question. An arrival that was still in progress, still becoming. The child will come in 7 weeks, she said. Faster than standard. Celine estimated closer to 6. Where will you be? She looked at the open land ahead of her. Here, or beyond here, somewhere I can let the activation complete without pack politics pressing against it from every direction. She glanced at him. Cale will stay. And me. The question held everything he was not asking. Not can I stay? Not will you let me? But the simpler, more honest form. Just and me. Where do I exist in this now? What role does the man who made every wrong choice get to hold in the aftermath of what those choices built? She had thought about this. Not in the fevered way she had thought about it in the early hours after the formal office. In the clear, deliberate way she had been thinking about most things since her wolf stopped being small. You can be present, she said, without leading, without deciding. She looked at him. If your wolf can manage that. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The first expression on his face since the formal office that was not weighted with guilt or calculation or the careful blankness of a man performing control. My wolf bowed without my permission to a woman in neutral territory, he said quietly. I think it has already managed it. She felt it then. The shift in her chest. Not the bond. Not the veil-born warmth. Something simpler and more complicated than either of those things. The first fragile movement of something that might one day become trust again. Not today, not soon, but possible. Present in the way a seed is present in winter soil. Unseen. Patient. Waiting for conditions that have not yet arrived, but are no longer impossible. Good, she said simply. Cale approached from the shelter with the practicality of someone who had given 2 people sufficient time and was now reinstating the schedule. The northern pass will be clear until midday. If we move before the 2nd hour, we reach the Ridge Valley before dark. Leora nodded. We move. She took one last look toward the south, toward the direction of Ashvale, toward the territory that had told her through its structures and its hierarchies and its administrative language that she was appropriate in specific rooms and nowhere else. Somewhere inside those walls, a girl named Nella was waking up, pressing her reddened hands against cold stone, learning the same lessons Leora had learned, being taught the same smallness. But Celine was still there, watching, waiting. The way she had watched and waited for Leora. The way she had kept the cloth and the map and the name folded beneath her table for 3 days before the world required them. The circle would hold. The knowledge would pass. And one day, when Nella was ready, someone would be waiting at the tree line for her too. Leora turned away from Ashvale. Let us go, she said. They walked, all 3 of them, then 4. Cale leading with the quiet efficiency of long practice. Leora beside her, one hand resting on her stomach, the other swinging freely at her side. and Theron falling in at a distance that was neither close enough to claim nor far enough to abandon. Following, and understanding the difference for what was perhaps the first time in his adult life, the valley opened below them, wide and unmapped and belonging to no one. The morning light touched it in slow gold stages, each ridge and fold of the land revealed gradually, patiently, the way all true things reveal themselves when they are given enough space and enough time and enough silence to arrive at their own pace. The child shifted inside her. Not a warning, not a question, an arrival. The air that Ashvale had tried to reduce to a problem was coming, and when it arrived, it would be born into open land and clear air and the arms of a mother who had walked through every narrow room they assigned her, and out the other side into something that had no ceiling and no walls, and no administrative language adequate to contain it. Leora walked forward. Her wolf walked with her, steady and certain and vast. And somewhere behind the eastern mountains, the next blood moon was already rising. They told me an Omega's story ends at rejection, that the hierarchy is not personal. It simply is, and the order of things does not bend for feeling. I believed that once. I was raised inside that belief the way you are raised inside a house that has been slowly shrinking around you. You do not notice the walls moving until the morning you cannot lift your arms. I lift my arms now. The alpha who spoke 2 words over my life and walked out of the room learned that those 2 words were not an ending. They were a sequence, a biological key turned in a lock that his family spent 3 generations pretending did not exist. The pact that called me appropriate in specific rooms and nowhere else will feel the frequency of what I carry before I ever return to it, not as threat, as information, as the truth of what I always was beneath the gray wolf they decided was the whole of me. I am 6 weeks further along now. The child moves with the particular certainty of something that has never once doubted its right to exist. I am learning from that daily. I was an Omega. I was rejected. I was told, handle it. And I did.